Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Morrow, President of the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you all so much for joining us today to hear timely information on the Greene County administration of the Federal CARES Act Relief Fund that is underway right now. And we're really pleased to have great guests here today that can help us understand that situation that much better. And I'll introduce them in just a moment. But before we do that, I do want to just share with you that we have had a number of questions shared already in advance. Submitted. I want to thank you for getting those questions to us. We do hope to get to as many of those as we can today. And in addition, if you have a question that comes up during today's discussion, you can always email those to Lauren Musto on our team. That email address is lmusto@springfieldchamber.com. That's LMUSTOE@springfieldchamber.com. And we'll do our very best to get to as many questions as possible today. You can also submit those questions into the chat function on the Zoom program if you're joining us that way today as well. The first case of COVID-19 was reported in Greene County in early March, and I don't think any of us could have expected back then just how widespread the impact of this pandemic would be on our community. And during this time, we've seen firsthand the struggles and negative financial hardships that businesses in our community have faced as they work through response and recovery efforts of various kinds. To help lessen the blow of these economic struggles, the U.S. Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Securities Act, also known more commonly as the CARES Act, on March 27th. This relief package provided over $2 trillion in aid, including $150 billion in direct funding for state and local governments. So out of that $150 billion, the state of Missouri received $2.4 billion in federal funding, and a portion of this was then dispersed to counties based on population to get out into the areas of greatest need in their communities. Greene County received approximately $34 million in grant funding to help provide support payments focused on several COVID-19 related expenses incurred by various entities in the community from March 1st through the end of this year, the end of 2020. So applications for the Greene County CARES Act Relief Fund opened on July 20th. And among that $34 million, $6.5 million was available specifically set aside for small business grant awards. With some small businesses, there are a number of small businesses that have already utilized those grant awards to help keep their doors open and keep functioning well during this time. Our speakers today will help us by providing some insights on the application process for small business applicants, because there is still funding available, but the time is running short. We are looking at a September 30 deadline for submitting grant applications, so this is a very timely message, timely information for our members. Dr. Lyle Foster and Gordon Kinney have been directly involved with the CARES Act Relief Fund response effort. Dr. Foster serves in many different roles in our community, including as a small business owner himself, and also as an experienced grant writer. And he's with us today as the grant administrator for Greene County CARES Act Relief Fund. Gordon Kinney is the president of MedPay, former Springfield Chamber of Commerce Board Chairman as well, and notably he was the 2019 Springfieldian Award recipient, and he's currently serving as the chair of the CARES Act Relief Fund Citizen Advisory Council. In addition to all of their many qualifications for this, one of the things that I appreciate most is that both of these men understand small business well. They own small businesses, they work with small businesses frequently, long before coronavirus or anything else, and so just really appreciate the perspective that Lyle and Gordon bring to this conversation. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking time to share your insights, your expertise and guidance on how small businesses can utilize the funding resource. And so with that, I'll go ahead and just turn things over to Lyle to start maybe with an overview of the program and the work so far, and maybe a little bit about what our members need to know about eligibility guidelines. Lyle, what can you tell us?
Good morning, Matt, and I also want to say good morning to Gordon. And thank you so much for this opportunity this morning to talk and hopefully answer some questions from those participating in the call about the small business application program for the CARES Act through Greene County. We're really very excited, and I think we're also very fortunate to have this opportunity for small businesses in our community. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just give a couple of minutes explaining the philosophy or the approach that Greene County utilized, because I think that's important to understand the context for this conversation this morning.
Sure.
So we actually divided the funding up into 5 categories, and I know Gordon will talk a little bit more about that process in terms of the Citizens Advisory Council. And as you indicated, Matt, 6.5 million of that 34 million was put into a category for small business. The Greene County Commission under our presiding commissioner, Bob Dixon, were very intentional that we wanted to provide relief as much as we could for our small businesses. As we are all aware, many of our small businesses were closed under the stay-at-home order, and it's been a particular burden on our small businesses trying to survive the COVID pandemic. So what I wanted to explain was initially, we took an approach that we wanted to use an employee count allocation formula to award the funding. And we also used a threshold that a small business will be 50 employees or less. And so this was really our first phase, if you will, of the small business application process. And we thought our goal was to reach as many small businesses as possible with the opportunity to apply. We do understand that under SBA guidelines, oftentimes there are many thresholds for how a small business is defined in terms of employee count. We mirrored what the state of Missouri utilized, which for their CARES funding that they did statewide for small business, they also used the 50 employee count. And so we wanted to try to get some support, some assistance to as many small businesses as possible. We recognize that many businesses certainly had needs higher than $5, $10, $15, or $20,000. But our goal initially was to try to get as many businesses with some support to help alleviate the burden. Since that time, we've actually increased that employee count up to 80 employees, and then we've also raised the allocation formula to go with the increase in employee count. And so with that in mind, businesses can then go into our application portal on the Greene County MoGov website. There's a big red button that says CARES Relief Fund. And when you scroll down under that button, there's a couple drop-down buttons, and then that's the application. So that's kind of for starters, Matt. I didn't want to just give a whole speech at the beginning, but
sure,
a little bit of the background in terms of the approach that we're utilizing.
It's very, very helpful. How would you say, Lyle, that the process is going so far, work that's happened so far? Thank you for that conversation about eligibility guidelines. Anything broader, in terms of some of those aspects of the program, and how I guess maybe how we arrive at maybe some deadlines and things like that might be helpful to people.
Certainly. Well, under the Treasury Guidelines, the funding has to be allocated and completely spent by December 30th. So the county is trying to back that time frame up so that we can make sure that all of those funds are dispersed and spent in terms of at least, those checks are out prior to that time. So we really are looking at making sure that these funds are actually distributed before December 1st. And so that's one of the reasons why we have the September 30th guideline. We actually have a number of applications in queue. And what that means, and Gordon will talk more about this, going to our committee. So we do have applications that are under consideration, but we need more applications because we have the funding available. And I can't emphasize that enough. The funding is available. We think there has been some misinformation in the community. As you mentioned earlier, I am somewhat plugged into the community, so I've heard many questions. We've also gotten a lot of emails. And I want to emphasize this morning, and I can't say this enough, we want to respond to your questions, your needs, and your concerns. So please let us know. But I think there were some individuals who were told that if they got a PPP loan, they were not able to apply for the CARES funding. That is not correct, because we know that the PPP loan had a very specific time frame. So that does not disqualify you from applying for the Greene County CARES Fund. So I want to make sure that's clear. So you're asking in terms of how it's going. We are getting a lot of applications, but we have room in our funding to get many more applications. And that's why we appreciate this opportunity this morning.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time with it. We certainly want to help get the word out in any way we can. I'd like to turn now to Gordon to maybe walk us through a little bit about the committee, the Citizen Committee review side of this funding. Gordon, first, just let me say thank you to you and to the rest of the citizens who are serving in this capacity. It is no small lift from a volunteer perspective, but it's really important part of the process, and really appreciate you volunteering to lead that effort. Could you talk just a little bit about what does that process look like as the advisory council reviews applications, and what do our members need to know when they're applying?
So we got started I was reached out to by one of the commissioners if I knew anybody that would be a good candidate. And I thought about people, and I said, I'd maybe like to help with that. heaven forbid I got accepted and they asked me to chair it, but a lot of people listening know how that works in our city. There's a lot of opportunities. So we got started the latter part of July with the committee. They appointed 30 people. They're representative of all Greene County. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind. The entire county is eligible for this process. So it's not just specific to Springfield. And some of the county had already laid out the specifics of what they thought we should, how we should organize. And I think that's been correct. I think the 5 categories have been sufficient. And, you know, as Lyle, I don't know if Lyle mentioned, I can't remember right now, but we had a small business, of course, education, healthcare, nonprofit, and then government supported agencies. And that would be like the cities or the health department or things like that, that fall under various government health related things. And some of them went into healthcare also. So we first thing we had to do was break up where do people need to go. As an example, we thought the Greene County Health Department needed to probably go into healthcare because they are really on the very front end of this, as are, you know, Cox, Mercy, and other providers. And the decision was to take the committee members, there's 30, and divide them evenly amongst the various committees that are out there to do the review. Because of the magnitude of the number of applications coming in, we kind of agreed as a group that we would trust our subcommittee to come forward with a recommendation and you know, give us what they had. Then we decided you know, that we would try and meet every Wednesday evening to review all the applications that have been approved in the big group. So first you have to send in the application, the county staff scrubs it some, then it gets set into a file for the specific subcommittee to review. I was actually on the healthcare subcommittee, is the one I was on. Then I've kind of set in on some of the other meetings since I was the chairman of it. But so they review it, then they submit what they feel is the approved amount to us as the big advisory committee, and then we take each individual item and vote on it. And it's pretty laborious, I guess, having to do it and I call for all the votes, but we do make sure people abstain if they've got a conflict. We all signed a conflict of interest document, you know, so that they do abstain. And the main reason that we ask everybody to vote on each one individual, somebody may know something about one of these entities applying but they might not have been on the committee approving it. So we've had a couple of instances where people have asked questions, and we would pull that or table that one and send it back to the staff to look at. So there is, you know, I think good due diligence going through on this, you know, as it's done. So that's kind of the process we've been through. And we started doing our meetings the first part of August, and you know, just it's about an hour to an hour and a half process with the number of applicants we get. We did find, though, that bless their heart, the people that got or volunteered for or got appointed to nonprofit and small business really had to carry a bigger load than a lot of the others. I know on healthcare, we were pretty well done in the first 2 weeks of the process, that we still have some money left over, but with what we were allotted, we're pretty well done. So that's how it was done. And, you know, there's just a lot of confusion, and I'll just say this as a business guy, it is a government situation. The county was given money, but no direction on how do you set up, how do you distribute it. So all of a sudden, it's just imagine it's like opening a business. The good thing about it was capitalized, but how do you start the operation of the business? And that business is making sure you know, you can accept applications, you could review them, the process to do all that. And so it's been a pretty daunting task. And I do have to say, I think up to just here recently, Lyle was the only extra staff person that was brought on board, and the finance people and our county auditor have all been involved, and they attend every subcommittee meeting that occurs twice, sometimes a week. So it's been pretty crazy for them. And those of you that did the PPP, we did it. we keep wanting to ask for loan forgiveness, and we haven't been able to do that yet. I think I've signed loan documents a couple of times because they needed something corrected, this and that, and maybe it's just specific to us. But you know, the county's also just now, in the past, I guess, 10 days or so, gotten direction on how they need to be submitting things. So some checks have been held up. You know, mostly funding's been held up because we need direction on what we do, because you don't want to send money to somebody and find out you're missing a piece of information that maybe has been added. So it's been a pretty convoluted process. I know that, you know, so I talked to some small businesses, because when my name appeared, some people called me and said, hey, what's going on? But, you know, the county's moving really, I think, as quick as they can, given the hand they've been dealt. And I think we'll see a lot coming in. Specific, though, to small businesses, I was surprised that a lot of people didn't submit an application in. And those that I know personally, I said, you know, you ought to do that. And because we still have quite a bit of money to give out. The key thing, and you're probably going to hear this several times, if you want to apply, you need to go online and do an application, and you've got to get it in by September 30th. And the reason is the county's got to backfill all the allotments, all the grants, and justify that they have been spent, and we're either paying you for past or we're paying you for future. And they need time to do that before they can get it to so they can get it to the, you know, to the government. Federal, it ends up going to the federal government to do it. One good thing is, I think, is that BKD's been selected by and maybe Lyle, you were going to say that, selected by the state to be the auditor for the project. So that probably assists us some, because it may be, you know, the local office here and things like that. So we get some good help there. So that's pretty much it. I don't think I missed anything. You know, I'd be happy to talk to anybody, but the key for whoever's on the call, if you have not submitted yet, looks like there's 76 participants. I'm used to the Zoom stuff now, but luckily you don't have to look at my ugly mug on a Tuesday morning, because we're doing audio only, of course.
We're all pretty thankful for that, Gordon.
Yeah, I bet you are. Anyway, I just think you get your application in, and we're going to try and handle everybody we can. We do have ample money now. We get a big run on the fund. You know, we might not. But if you have thought you've submitted an application and you've not heard, if your submission was correct, and Lyle's probably going to touch base on this again, if your submission was correct, you will get an email. If you submitted and you have not heard, then it gets put into a file that it's incomplete, and those get worked, you know, maybe, and Lyle can attest that, but probably every other day. But it's a pretty daunting task. So if you've submitted and you've not heard, probably something was wrong with your application, and you'll be hearing back from them. But it's an instantaneous response, pretty much, what you have submitted, and everything is being completed correctly.
Thanks so much, Gordon. I will probably just go ahead and work through some of the questions that we received already. If you have questions that you would like to ask Lyle or Gordon about the program, please do use the chat function on Zoom to drop those questions to us, or send an email to Lauren Musto on our team. That's lmusto@springfieldchamber.com, LMUSTOE at springfieldchamber.com, and we'll get to as many of these questions as we can. Most of the questions, guys, really revolve around what businesses are eligible to apply and what types of expenses or economic impact is eligible for reimbursement through the CARES Act. So I might just start there. We heard you say that 80 employees or less is kind of that threshold for small business. Any other sort of criterion for the types of businesses that are eligible to apply, or is it strictly the employee count?
Our criteria in the Small Business Committee, going back to that committee structure that Gordon referenced, they have reiterated that you simply need to be a legal functioning business within the limits of Greene County. So you do need to be located in Greene County with a physical presence, and you should have a business license, and you should be current on your taxes, on your property taxes. And so that is one of the things that all of the applications are vetted when they go through committee. We do want to make sure that those things are actually in place. But those are really the requirements, and of course, as you just indicated, the employee count.
Okay.
So obviously in the application, though, you need to demonstrate that you've been impacted by COVID. I think in general terms, I think anybody who has a business has been impacted. And of course, that impact should be in a negative way by COVID. Yes, we do know there are a few niche businesses, perhaps your businesses has actually increased. You know, we know sometimes our bicycle shops or, you know, obviously some of the home improvement stores, but they have a much larger employee count. Some of those businesses experienced a positive growth in COVID, but you need to make the connection in your statement of need that your business has been hurt by the pandemic and give us a general sense of what that effect has been.
So it sounds like the expense eligibility is less about how you, I mean, I'm sure people's businesses are generally impacted, but it's really about not whether your business is flat or growing slower or not growing or whatever else, as much as it is being able to identify those specific impacts that are COVID related. Can maybe you guys, if you'd be willing to give maybe some examples of the kinds of expenses or impact that you've seen awarded so far, not calling out a particular business necessarily, but just describing some of the kinds of impacts and expenses that might be in that category?
Sure, and the one guidance I would give for those on the call today, you are not applying for revenue replacement. So, and what I mean by that is, so in your application, you're not saying that we lost $60,000 in revenue during the time we were closed, so we're applying to get that money back. What you're applying for are those ongoing operational costs that you still incurred as a business, and you were still trying to pay them with a reduced revenue stream. And so from that standpoint, those would be things such as your mortgage, your rent, your payroll, utilities, PPE, of course. Some businesses may have even done things to enhance social distancing. You might have put up barriers for enhanced social distancing within your business. Some businesses have done things for distance technology upgrades, improvements like that. So those are the things that you can actually state in your application. And there are line items that you can put on that application to indicate those expenditures. And that is probably the most simple way to think about the application process. What are those expenditures that you still have to maintain? And then we will be asking you to document from a receipt standpoint that you did make those expenditures. And then there's a reimbursement that we would anticipate the actual CARES funding would be taken care of.
And of course, Lyle, you may want to add that on small businesses, we are using formulas though, so that aren't looking directly at those costs. We're looking to make sure that you did incur them. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, so let me go over those. Thank you, Gordon. Let me go over those formulas, and I'm going to say something that I hope I don't get in trouble for. So with the 80 employee count, if your business has 0 to 10 employees, you will get you're eligible up to $5,000 in terms of your CARES fund. 11 to 25 employees, 10,000. And Matt, maybe you all can post it somewhere at the chamber.
Yes.
But obviously this is on our website at the county. 26 to 40 employees, $15,000. 41 to 50 employees, $20,000. 51 to 60 employees, $25,000. 61 to 70 employees, $30,000. 71 to 80, $35,000. Now, the part that I don't want to get in trouble for, if there is still funding left in the application portal for the committee has the intention of going back and looking at a second pass for the businesses that have been approved in terms of hardship cases. And so there may be an additional opportunity for funds, but the initial period, those funds will be allocated based on your employee count. So this goes back to what I was saying initially, that we're trying to make sure we can at least give some funding to as many businesses as we possibly can. So that's what that, and to date, about 7% of our applications have been from those businesses that actually have an employee count of 10 or less employees. So we're happy that we're able to get that to really what I call those mom and pop businesses. But at the same time, that's one of the reasons why we still have a pretty healthy fund balance, and we really want to, get as much of those funds out as possible. So as we've increased that employee count, we anticipate the average of our additional funding is going to actually increase.
I think so. One of the questions that just came in, actually, I'll share this because it seems timely for what we're describing. Is the funding based on employee count or reimbursable expenses? And it sounds like the answer is kind of a combination of those. And then a follow up is what kinds of documentation are required to support requests, and just wonder if you could speak to that.
It's based on employee count, and that's really what it's based on. But here's the snag: the documentation needs to support the amount you're eligible for. So in other words, if based on the employees you're eligible for $15,000 in reimbursement, then you need to have documentation up to $15,000. So you wouldn't just say I've got X amount of employees, I'm eligible for $15,000. You have to also have the documentation of receipts and expenses to support the amount you're eligible for.
So,
in terms of the documents that you would need, what we are recommending that if people can submit this with your application, it's going to help expedite your application process. So your W-9 statement, profit and loss of P&Ls for 2020 and 2019, comparables for the same period, a copy of your business license. So if you can submit that with the application, you can upload documents that will help the committee and help the staff within the county to process your application, because those are things we will need. And then if you already have your receipts, you can also attach those to your application as well. And that's just simply going to make the process faster in terms of getting the fund award back to you.
and Matt, we have several that we've looked at and approved funding, and I failed to talk about the last piece of this. So the subcommittee sends it to the advisory committee, and it's 30 people from all over the county, and some of them I've been around a fairly long time. Those of you who know me know I have, and a lot of people, it's my first time meeting them. They're varied backgrounds, and it's really, I think, a real eclectic group, really diverse and good. But we have had groups that we have just given them less than what their employee count would substantiate, because that's what they requested and what they were going to be able to document. So you need to understand that if just because you might have, as Lyle says, say up to 25 employees, between 10 and 25, you're not going to get 10,000 if you're just requesting reimbursement for items you spend of 8,000. You probably will get to 8,000 instead allocated. Assuming we have funds left when we get to your application.
So one of the questions, and just to reiterate, we mentioned this earlier, but this is for paying for expenses that can be retroactive. So it's any expenses from March 1st through the end of this year. Is that right, guys?
That's correct, but we would encourage you in your application, because I would think, Matt, most small businesses that have been impacted, you should have enough expenses probably up until now,
right?
Opposed to going into the future. That's just going to make your application process simpler. So really from the guideline period, and this is established by the Treasury Department, it's from March 1st, as you said, through December, but we would anticipate you should have enough reimbursable expenses to reach your threshold level from March 1st to when you're submitting your application.
I think about, as I listen to you describe that, if I were advising small businesses, certainly would advise them to get the application in ASAP with the employee count. And if let's just say you're eligible for $15,000 based on your employee count, if you can document more expenses than that are, legitimate COVID-related expenses, I'd go ahead and document those in case there is a second round or something that comes back later. So here I am offering advice, not knowing a whole lot about it. What do you think?
Matt, I'm thinking you should come over and help us, because
that's right. Put him on a committee.
Right. Yes, please show those additional expenses, because if we are able to do that second round, then we'll already have that documentation in place. Yes, please give us a true picture of how you've been hurt. We want to know that, because we know small businesses have been, severely impacted by the pandemic. So yes, feel free to do that. We do caution, though, that the CARES funding is not for business expansion. I think I've had some questions, like it's not to add a second floor or to start a new location. It's really to help mitigate, and that word is very important, help to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on your business operations. I also want to emphasize, and I'll say this again before we get off the call, feel free to email me at lfoster@greenecountymo.gov. So feel free to send me an email and I'm happy to respond back to you. If you need me to give you a call, put your phone number in your email, and I will contact you. I've talked to many small business owners, and if you've got a specific question that's not covered today, we can discuss it. But what you just said, Matt, is perfect.
I don't want to put you on the line here, Lyle, but I will say that I have, and many of our members have reached out to you via email, and I don't know if you ever turn off, because I get messages back from you sometimes awfully late at night, even in the middle of continuing to work. So all day and all night right now, it feels like.
That's what we do. That's how we do it.
Okay. Well, you mentioned earlier, this is another question, but you mentioned earlier, I want to reiterate that if you've received a PPP loan, which many small businesses have, that it doesn't make you ineligible for this. But you have to be careful about not asking for money twice for the same thing. Is that it?
Yes, these funds should be not duplicative of what you've already received. And I know some small businesses have also gotten funding from the state CARES funding. So, I mean, the good news is there have been several different ways to get support, but these should be, what you were funded from those other sources needs to be distinct and different from what you're being funded for or asking for funding for from Greene County CARES.
Okay, I'm going to pivot just a little bit here because we have a couple of questions related to sort of the timeline here. Can't emphasize enough that September 30 is a very important date to remember in terms of getting your application in. But then the questions kind of revolve around the process after that. So, how long do you anticipate it takes to work through the process toward eventual hopeful approval? And then once approval happens, how long before those dollars might be flowing to small businesses?
Currently, we've probably got a 3-week queue in terms of how soon your business application gets to our small business committee. As Gordon has described, we have a citizens advisory council broken up into committees. So there's a small business committee that actually reviews your application. We have a target goal of how many applications we get through in a week. If we see we need to meet twice, we're prepared to do that. So generally, based on our employee applications that we have, well, the small business applications we have now, we probably would recommend about a 3-week period of time. Then they have a 1-week period once the committee goes through where we just vet. If we got that information already, such as your copy of your business license, proof of your taxes being paid, then that makes it easier for that. Then it goes to the commission. Once it goes to the commission, then it has to go through the check writing process. So that's kind of the time frame. So I would anticipate it'd be at least a month once your application goes in. Feel free though to email and ask questions about your application if you haven't heard anything. But what Gordon said earlier is very important. When you submit your application, you will get an email immediately stating, thank you for submitting your application. If you do not get that email, that means your application has not been correctly submitted. And that's very important. So make sure that you've got that. Otherwise, your application is kind of hanging out in the incomplete application portal. We do periodically go back in and try to get those applications completed by emailing you. But if you don't get that application confirmation, that means that you're missing something or something is incorrect. You can email and ask me about that, but that's very, very important so that your application does get in process.
And Lyle, you might mention, because I'm one of these tech challenge deals. I mean, booking airfare, I go back and I get your airfare is not complete, go back, and I'm always missing something. But you had mentioned this morning we were visiting, there's a little checkbox on there that sometimes everything's done, but that you might want to point that out to everybody.
Yes, thank you, Gordon. One thing that we have noticed, there's a utilization and compliance checklist. Please read each of those questions. These are things that we're mandated by the U.S. Treasury Department to ask in our application process. We have had a few applications that either have been bounced back or we have to go back and ask questions. And these ask things such as, are you current on your taxes, your license, making sure that the funds are being used in this particular period and that you're following compliance. It does ask questions in terms of felonies, suspension, being barred from receiving federal funds. Some people just go down and start checking yes. And then we're actually coming back and say, did you mean to check yes on this question? And then the person will say, or the applicant will say, no, I made a mistake. So my point is simply read those questions carefully from the beginning, and then that'll prevent your application being slowed down because of a mistake. So that's the utilization and compliance questions. This is a one-size-fits-all application. So everybody's completing the same application. So we did that to try to make it user friendly. It was also mentioned in the chat room that we do ask for your employee count for full-time and part-time. 2 part-time employees count as 1 full-time in terms of that employee count threshold for the funding formula.
And Matt, I might add, we have a big advisory committee meeting this Wednesday, and we're probably going to ask if those people that a lot of the committees are wrapped up, they're pretty well done, or they've got a few $1,000 left that they'll distribute, but their workload's pretty down. And we have had one member of the committee that agreed to join the small business group to help us out. So we may see if some more people will go over and serve there and help expedite the approval process if possible. But it takes a certain amount of time to get through one, at subcommittee level, and then a certain amount of time to get through it at the advisor level. And it's just the due diligence that has to be done.
I mean, the last thing anybody would want would be to have dollars awarded that then didn't qualify and you had to go reconcile that later. You want to make sure you're good on the front end.
That's correct.
Another question here that just came through on the chat is are nonprofits eligible to submit applications up until September 30th also? So I guess for those other categories, other than small businesses, there are some dollars left in some of those other categories. Would you advise them to, if they happen to fall in one of those, to also submit before September 30th?
Well, everybody knows Springfield and Greene County has a lot of nonprofits, and that's one of those committees that Gordon was referring to earlier that has really had to roll up their sleeves and work every week. As of yesterday morning, our nonprofit funding has all been actually allocated and recommended to the commission. So we're actually going to be putting up a notice that the period of taking in applications for nonprofits is over.
So one of the things that I thought was I don't know how you did this exactly, but you seem to have done it really well in terms of first picking the categories for grant monies, and then allocating the appropriate proportions of that $34 million to these various categories. Seems to have been done pretty well. Do you have flexibility as a committee or as county commission to if things start getting a little bit late in the year and you have more needs in one category but more money left in another category, to move some dollars around if it comes to that, or what options do you have?
Sure. What we're looking at currently, if any of the committees have funding left, they would turn that back to the commission and leave it up to the discretion of our county commission what to do with those fundings. The citizen process, as Gordon has indicated earlier, is actually fairly unique in terms of how this process has been implemented across the country. As you said at the beginning, Matt, state and local governments throughout the nation actually receive the CARES funding. And we have looked at best practices across the country. In many cases, county governments have just simply, on a staff level, made recommendations and decisions about how to use the funds. So I think our commission really should be applauded for actually getting the citizens involved. And I think this really shows a very community-based and very transparent approach. And so because we don't want to, I think, keep this process going too long, because again, those funds have to be spent. Anything left in committees will go back to the commission, and then they can make a decision at that level with their set aside or the contingency funds, as well as any remaining balances, because there are some categories that they are aware of that they could actually use for those last funds.
In the time that we have remaining, which is maybe 15 minutes or so, I want to cover just a few other questions that are a little more granular, kind of down in the weeds, but right where a lot of small businesses probably need some counsel right now. And that's so you mentioned, both of you mentioned, that the best thing to do, and there probably are enough expenses for most small businesses that have already been incurred, to go ahead and use that as what you apply for grant money in. But if someone is applying for grant money that is for payroll or for rent or whatever else in the months that are ahead between now and the end of the year, what kinds of or other expenses, PPE, you name it, what kinds of when those are awarded, then how quickly do those dollars need to be spent, and then how do you sort of circle back and get the documentation back to the county so that everything is accounted for?
I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that, because The funding window is tightening. So, and by that, I mean, Matt, you know, if we're looking at probably a month in terms of when they would get their funding, you know, confirmation, that means they're really going to have a very small window of time to spend any future funds. And generally what we're looking at, a person would have to spend those dollars and then be reimbursed. So I think the applicant would have to be prepared to do that. And so you're looking at probably a 30 to 40-day window of time in which to do that. And then we're going to have the documentation back to the county that, you know, everything you did was eligible. So I'm thinking you would almost have to talk to us individually. I wouldn't like to put that as a blanket statement because I think that's going to be just slightly challenging because of the time frame, because the county wants to wrap up its process by the beginning of December. So internally, we can confirm that all of those funds are spent, because we don't want to return anything back to the federal government, because anything we do not spend, at least unless something happens in Washington, reverts back to the federal government. So we want to make sure all of our funds are responsibly spent.
That's probably the one place we can all agree it won't do any good at all. Right. If it goes back. If it goes back. Is there a maybe a form or a reimbursement form or something like that that the county has for people who have been approved for grants but need to claim those dollars or document what their expenses have been?
Sure, thank you for that. And that was something I was hoping we'll get to. So once a small business will be approved by the commission, they actually will get a sub-recipient grant agreement. That's going to come out of one of our offices. Currently, the treasurer's office is doing that at the county. They're going to get a sub-recipient grant agreement, and it's going to give specific instructions for your next steps in terms of how to submit your receipt documentation.
Okay. This one coming over. I'm sorry, Gordon, were you?
Well, I was just going to add, and I don't know how many of our participants are on Zoom or called in, but Cindy Stein, who's been just wonderful to work with. She's our county auditor. She's on there giving some answers to things, but I'm assuming there's some folks on the phone that can't see that. And I don't know if your staff wants to go over that or not, you know, on there, but on the chat, if you're doing Zoom, and I've done way too many of these things. If you're on Zoom, the chat gives you some questions, and there are also some answers and some information in there. I just thought we ought to point out.
Right, absolutely. And Lyle thankfully mentioned one comment that Cindy shared earlier that our county auditor shared, which was that the application for grants includes a field for both full-time employees and a field for part-time employees. You need to list the count in the appropriate box for each of those, and that helps sort of calculate what you're eligible for. And then another question that just came through on the chat that probably applies to a number of small businesses is, can you submit expenses for healthcare premiums paid by the employer during this period of time?
If Cindy Stein is still on the call, I'm going to let her answer that in the chat room, because I just want to get out the correct information, because that can sometimes be unique for each employer, and I just don't want to put out a blanket answer that may not be applicable, because I know some businesses are self-funding, some businesses are using various plans. And of course, Gordon, he's in that world, so I don't want to put the wrong information. Okay. And if we don't get a response in the chat, you can certainly email me and respond directly to you.
So Sandy just responded, healthcare premiums paid by the employer are eligible as part of the payroll bill. Because I'm in the business, that would be one of the conflict of interest. So I didn't want to answer that one myself either, but Cindy's right on the spot on it. So yes, it is, Megan.
The one exception to that, Megan, would be if you, just like we said before, if you have already been reimbursed for those healthcare premiums, which would have been an eligible expense under PPP, for example, then not the same ones. But that may have reimbursed you for expenses of earlier months, and this could be for later months or any of that as well. A follow-up question here is if someone submits the grant and the grant is denied, do they get notification back of that? If there's is there an opportunity for a second try if something like that happens, or how does that work?
Sure. Generally, what's going to take place, if there's a reason where we're concerned or your application may not be approved, we will follow up if it's something that you can actually address or change. So if it's something that is really beyond our control, then you get a notification that your application was not approved. And that really would be the end of that. That's not necessarily an appeal process, because generally thing that's denied is because of the eligibility guidelines. For example, your business, you need to be in business, we're saying, prior to the beginning of the year. So this is not intended for a business that started up in May. So, so there are some things that are beyond our control. And so the denial, or if your business is outside of Greene County, but we've had some applicants who say they're located maybe in Branson, but they do something in Greene County. We're required that you actually have a physical location in Greene County. So generally your denials are going to be things beyond our control.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. If it's something like that, then there's really no point in reapplying, because that's a hard and fast thing.
Yes.
One of the best things that I would just encourage people who are listening today, who are tuned into this, that as you're getting this information, you likely have networks of small businesses of your own, not just your own small business, but your professional network also. We have heard from people, and you guys probably even hear this in the community. Hard to believe because you're so immersed in this, but there are still small businesses, quite a few in Greene County, who they've been very occupied. They've been very focused on keeping their business moving forward, even in normal times, and especially now, and might not even know that this is available. And that's hard to believe because it's been available for so long. But one of the best things that you can do, in addition to applying yourselves, if you're eligible, is to share this information and share it quickly because of that quickly arriving September 30th deadline. What advice would each of you guys give to people who are listening right now, thinking about what they might be doing? Any words of wisdom or advice for them?
I'm going to let Gordon start off with that.
Well, there's an ego factor for some small businesses in it, and I've talked to several, and I dealt with it and I don't know if I'm answering your question directly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's we were hesitant to do it for ourselves, and I'm just speaking for MedPay. Now we're not going to probably apply for the money here. Part of it's just conflict of interest, I think, for me being on the committee, and where we would impact the PPPs kind of helped us. So I think we feel pretty good. But anybody knows me knows my politics, so I felt a little bit like a socialist applying for the money. But I think you really need to take your ego and set it on the side, and if it's there, you need to do it because it is there for that reason, and we're all suffering from it. I mean, we're seeing losses from it. You see losses that aren't revenue losses. You see losses like we've had one COVID case in our office, and that puts a burden on you because this person was pretty ill for 2 or 3 days, couldn't do their function, so others had to pick it up. So I just would apply for it if you haven't, and if you have a need. I mean, if you're in business where you just don't have the need, and I mean, you look at the dollars, that there's a cap in what you're going to get based on your size. Then let the others be there. But there's nothing better for our economy and the welfare of the community than jobs, and that's what this is important about, is to help employers stay in business and provide, keep providing the jobs for people.
Thank you, Gordon. And Matt and Gordon, I want to say that reading these applications and our committee looking over the applications, it's really a very eye-opening process to really see, because many of our small businesses on their applications under their statement of need, anticipated impact, they're sharing oftentimes their stories of how the pandemic has affected them. Some of our business owners themselves, have been affected personally by COVID, or their employees. And so it's really fairly gut-wrenching to really see these and hear these personal accounts of what has happened. And so we all know that we love our community. We love Springfield and Greene County. So this is an opportunity to address, it doesn't solve everything, but at least to provide some relief for our small businesses. Small businesses, we are you are the backbone of our community. It's not just a cliche, it's a real statement. And I have heard from some small business owners, and I understand this mindset. Well, it's a headache, it's dealing with the government, this is not worth doing, we're not going to get any money. I've heard some of that. I know when you're an entrepreneur, the last thing you have time to do after a 12-hour day is go home and do a grant application. But we tried to make this application as user-friendly, as easy to complete as possible. We have sometimes personally walked through small businesses owners and whoever's doing the application. I've had husbands and wives on the telephone together trying to figure out what to do. Not because maybe it's so complicated, but maybe they just didn't understand what the question. There's no question that is, that you're embarrassed by asking. Call and ask. Let us know what you're trying to understand so you can get the application completed. We are inviting you. We're appealing to you. And when you're going out to the small businesses that you patronize and support, if you don't mind, ask them, say, hey, have you applied for the CARES Fund through Greene County? Get those applications in by September 30th. When you go to greenecountymo.gov, there's a big red button that says CARES Relief Fund. There's a drop-down menu and it says general information. There's also a video with yours truly. Try to ignore that, but you might want to just hear a few points on that. But there's a big blue button and it says application. Click that button on, you get a username and password. Please keep track of your username and password because that allows you to go back in and complete your application. And again, make sure that you actually hit that submit button and get a confirmation email. Our IS department has been tremendous. They have even contacted people personally and walked them through some of the steps to make sure those applications get completed. And then finally, I can't emphasize enough what the administrative staff has done in our county. I think sometimes, I'm from the outside, so people look at public employees that they're just kind of there looking out the window and, just kind of having a field day. The administrative staff that I've been working with at Greene County are second to none. They're working 12, 14, 16-hour days. And this CARES program is something they didn't know was coming, but an infrastructure has been put in place and they are working 7 days a week to try to respond and to make sure that they're doing this in a way that will pass audit and will satisfy the guidelines. So I actually applaud them, and some of them I know are on the call today, and Cindy Stein has been in the chat room answering your questions. So everybody's doing all that they can to make sure that we are complying, but more importantly, that we can serve you and get your applications and get relief back out into our community. That's what the goal is to help support our community and to survive.
That's great counsel from both of you. I will take just the last 5 minutes here and do a little cleanup in the chat so that we can use every last second that we have, almost kind of a lightning round. For those who may be listening in ways other than Zoom, I want to share a question that was answered on the chat because I think it's relevant. One question was, do the funds awarded to each entity in each category have to be spent by that entity before the end of the year? And County Auditor Cindy Stein answered, yes, all the funds must be expended by December 30th. However, as a practical matter, expenses already incurred are your best option. And that's, I think, one of the really important things to emphasize is if you've had impact already and you can document that, then that's really, practically speaking, your best option. Another question, this is a good one for you guys, if you're able to provide a quick answer here. If there are not enough applications for all the funds, or if a business cannot submit acceptable receipts for their grant reimbursement, what happens to leftover funds after September 30th? And I think you talked a little bit about this before, but if there are leftover funds and we get past that deadline, then what happens?
Those leftover funds will go from the committee back to the commission. And I think the commission is certainly aware of other needs. As you know, our public health emergency, those have the top priority. So the commission would simply utilize those remaining dollars and allocated them to other. We've had applications in other categories that exceeded our funding that we had by those categories. And so there are other places that the commission can certainly award those funds. So they will go back to the commission fund.
Another great question.
And I might add, Matt, that we've approved from the committee standpoint to the commission. Now, this is from the committee to the commission into $20 million so far, and the checks are going to start, I think, coming out pretty quick on that. So, there, and I know as an example that the county held back some money just in case. There's 34 million. We got a little over 30 million to distribute, and so we've distributed well into, or have approved well into, $20 million, over $20 million. So we don't want to see any money have to go back to the government, right? I mean, we'd like to see it stay in the county if at all possible.
One more quick question, really good question from Howard Fisk. He asked, do we need to provide financials from, say, March 1st to October 1? And Auditor Cindy Stein shared again, Great answer here. Financial statements should be submitted for a comparable period. So, for example, if you had impact that you are recognizing for a period of time in 2020, offer financials from that same period of time in 2019 and in 2020 so people can compare and look at the difference and see that impact. And all of that financial information will be kept confidential as well. Thanks so much for that, Cindy.
And you don't need to submit financials if you've got receipts. I had a text from a person I know that asked that question, and Lyle, you correct me if I'm wrong, or Cindy, but what you're trying to do is justify expenditures you've had up to the amount of money that you can get per your employee size. Like if you've got up to 25 employees, the most we're going to allocate at this first go around, assuming we still have the funds when we get to your application, is $10,000. So we don't need to see your P&L to get that. Isn't that correct, Lyle? As long as we have substantiation from you for $10,000 of expenses already incurred.
I believe the Treasurer's Office would still like to see the comparable P&Ls for 20.
Would they? Okay. Because I know some people don't want to release that, and I do understand that. So.
Yeah, and everybody has signs. All our committee members sign confidentiality and conflict of interest questions. So your personal information, and I know this is a very personal. For entrepreneurs and small business owners, that's not being disclosed. They're signing confidentiality agreements.
So maybe time for one last question on the chat could you please let us know again what needs to be submitted along with the application to make the process as easy and smooth as possible? Any advice on that? I know there's an opportunity where you can upload documents, receipts, orders, that kind of thing, maybe P&L statements even online. Is that something that you advise?
Well, that's what we kind of referenced earlier, but with your application to make it simpler, W-9, if you put your W-9 form, and we do have one on the Greene County website that you can draw down, profit and loss statements for comparable periods, 2019, 2020, a copy of your business license. That would be, if you have that convenient, hopefully you have one. If you don't have one, please get one, but, and a copy of the business license. If you would submit those with the applications, and you also can submit your receipts as well. And take Matt's advice, even exceeding what your employee count formula would be, because if we're able to go back with the second funding allocation, then we would go by those additional receipts under the hardship provision.
Well, guys, you've been enormously helpful today, and we've used every second of this time. Unfortunately, our time is up, but I want to give a big thank you again to our guests today, Dr. Lyle Foster and Gordon Kinney, for just providing incredible expertise and knowledge on CARES Act funding and this application process here in Greene County. I know the process has been a tremendous undertaking, and it's also just vitally important to our community. So just want to thank you guys so much for your work. There are small businesses. I mean, I don't think this is overstating it because there's been such enormous impact. There are small businesses that will continue to be able to operate based on the work that you're doing as an important bridge to keep them afloat and keep them moving. And so I know it's an enormous undertaking. I know you've spent countless hours working on this, but I just want to thank you so much for it. And thank you for being on the call today too. Thank you,
Matt, and thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, guys. Good luck, everybody. God bless.
Thanks so much, fellas. So for those of you who are joining us today, by now you should have received, hopefully, a frequently asked questions document. Our staff team created this document specifically about this topic to help our members further understand this grant process. A number of the things that we've discussed today are covered on that document in brief, and so hopefully that will be of some assistance to you. That document can also be found on our website, and that should be a good follow-up for today's discussion as well. I want to encourage you to go there, springfieldchamber.com/coronavirus. Share that, please, with others. Again, we don't put any of that behind a firewall. Our members, like those of you on the call today, sort of get the first crack at it because you're the ones who we know how to contact. But we want this to be available to all small businesses in our community, regardless of chamber membership. So please do help us get the word out for that. springfieldchamber.com/coronavirus is where you can find more information. And today's call will also be posted there, so people can listen to that as almost like a podcast at their own convenience as well. I also want to thank all of our members who joined us today. We know this has been an incredibly difficult time for our business community, and we are here to continue supporting you and connecting you with timely information during this crisis, and we'll continue to do that. If your question was not answered today, or if you need more clarification on anything that was discussed, please do reach out to Lauren Musto on our public affairs team. That's L Musto at springfieldchamber.com, LMUSTOE at springfieldchamber.com. We'll do our very, very best to get answers to your questions as quickly as possible. Please keep visiting the Chamber website and look for Chamber emails for up-to-date business, safety, and policy-related information. As always, we're so grateful for your membership and inspired by the ways that you set an example as small businesses in our community continuing to innovate, thrive, and make things work through unthinkable circumstances. And thank you for being a part of the Springfield Area Chamber of Commerce.